I was 15 when my parents dumped me at my grandfather's farm in the middle of a snowstorm. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. Years later at his funeral, they returned like vultures to claim his $100 million fortune. But what they didn't know was, I had become more than the broken boy they left behind. My name is Lucas Morgan, and this is not just a story of betrayal. It's the story of how I turned abandonment into a legacy they could never touch. 2012, the night I was abandoned. The snow fell in thick, wet clumps, blanketing the narrow road as our old station wagon creaked along the outskirts of Concord, New Hampshire. I remember the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle, squeaking every few seconds. My fingers were numb despite the gloves pressed tight between my knees. I was 15. My name is Lucas Morgan. And this was the night my life changed forever. My mother, Eleanor, didn't say a word. She just kept tapping her fingers on the steering wheel. My father, Patrick, sat in silence beside her, staring straight ahead as if driving into a fog. We'd left Boston 2 hours earlier without warning. They said we were going on a short trip just for a weekend. I didn't pack much, just a duffel bag, my winter coat, and a book I never ended up opening. We pulled up to a long gravel driveway where a wooden gate creaked open slowly. A dim porch light flickered on the front of a 2-story farmhouse, surrounded by frost-covered trees. It looked more like a painting than a place someone actually lived in. My heart thudded as I tried to make sense of what we were doing here. Dad didn't even park the car properly. He left the engine running, stepped out, and opened the trunk. He yanked out my bag and dropped it near the steps. My mom turned around in her seat just once. Her eyes didn't meet mine. "You'll be staying with your grandfather for a while," she muttered. "Just until things settle down." I opened my mouth to ask what that meant, but she turned back before I could speak. Then she stepped out too. No hugs, no goodbyes. The front door opened with a groan, and there he was. Raymond Morgan, my grandfather. 72 years old, silver hair combed back neatly, wearing an old flannel shirt and thick wool socks. He didn't look surprised, didn't look angry either, just tired. He stood on the porch without speaking, watching my parents like a man watching a storm he knew was coming. My father gave a brief nod, the kind you give a stranger at a gas station, then turned and got back in the car. They didn't wait for me to say anything. They didn't even wait for the engine to warm up. The car backed out, tires crunching over snow and gravel taillights fading into the night. I stood frozen, the wind cutting through my coat, my breath curling in the air. Grandpa Raymond stepped aside and gestured toward the door. He still hadn't said a word. I picked up my bag and walked past him into a warm, faintly musty hallway. The house smelled like old books, wood polish, and something earthy I couldn't place. He closed the door behind us and locked it with a sharp click. Then he finally spoke. "You hungry?" I shook my head. He nodded, said nothing else, and motioned me to follow. I was led up a wooden staircase to a small room with a twin bed, a wooden desk, and a lamp that flickered when he turned it on. "You can sleep here," he said simply. I dropped my bag and looked around. The window faced the forest, no other houses in sight. Just dark, heavy trees pressing in against the glass. It felt like another planet. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer, then added bathrooms down the hall. "Breakfast is at 7. And then he left. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall, unsure if I wanted to cry, scream, or just sleep and forget the whole night. My phone buzzed once. A text from my mom. "Take care of yourself." That was all. No love you, no promise to come back, nothing. I didn't reply. I lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere downstairs, I heard the old wooden floor creak as Grandpa moved around. Outside, the wind picked up and the snow kept falling. That was the night I learned what silence really sounded like. The first days at the farm. The silence didn't end that night. It followed me into the next morning and settled in like the cold. Grandpa knocked on my door at exactly 7. Just one knock. I got dressed and followed the smell of eggs and burnt toast to the kitchen. He didn't ask how I slept. He didn't say much at all. He pointed at the chair across from him. I sat. We ate. The toast was a little too black on the edges, but I didn't complain. After breakfast, he pushed a heavy coat toward me and handed me boots. We stepped outside into a white world of trees and frozen soil. He showed me the chicken coop, the greenhouse that looked like it hadn't been used in a decade, and the long shed behind the barn. "That's the shop," he said, and unlocked it with a thick brass key. Inside it smelled of oil and metal and dust. There were tools lined up perfectly, drawers labeled with neat handwriting and blueprints pinned to the walls like art. There were wires, metal scraps, and half-finished machines I couldn't name. "What is all this?" I asked. "Old projects," he replied. "Some worked, some didn't." He didn't elaborate. But he stayed in the shop most of the day, only calling me when he needed a second pair of hands. I held wires, fetched tools, handed him notes. He didn't talk unless it was about the work. At night, we ate in silence. I read a few pages of my book, then went to bed. The cycle repeated. The days were cold. The nights were colder. I missed the noise of the city, the traffic, even the arguments at home. Here, the wind whispered through the walls and the floors moaned with every step. A week passed. I started noticing small things. Grandpa coughed, often dry and short, and sometimes disappeared for a while into the bathroom with a small black pouch. One evening, I passed by his room and saw him injecting something into his thigh. He noticed me in the reflection of the mirror. "Close the door, Lucas," he said calmly. I did. One morning, he handed me a pair of gloves and pointed to the irrigation system behind the barn. A pipe had frozen over. I climbed up the side to check it out. The ladder slipped on the frost. I fell. Pain shot up my arm like fire. I screamed. Grandpa was there before I knew it. He didn't say anything, just checked my wrist, then lifted me like I weighed nothing and carried me inside. He wrapped it in ice, cut off my sleeve, and splinted the arm with precision that didn't come from guesswork. His hands were steady, his face unreadable. "We're going to the clinic in town," he said, but he didn't move right away. He looked at me, his eyes tired but sharp. "You're the only one I've got left, Lucas." It was the first real thing he'd said to me since I arrived. Something shifted in his voice, a crack, a truth. We didn't say anything else the whole drive, but I kept replaying those words in my head, "the only one I've got left." That night, as I lay in bed with my arm throbbing and a sling around my shoulder, I thought about everything he hadn't said. All the silence filled with things he didn't know how to express. Maybe this place wasn't empty. Maybe it was waiting for someone to listen. The quiet legacy. Spring came slowly. The snow melted into mud and the trees outside began to show tiny green buds. Grandpa's routines never changed, but he let me deeper into his world little by little. One rainy afternoon, as we were organizing drawers in the workshop, I found a dusty photo album wedged behind a cabinet. I flipped it open and saw a much younger version of him standing next to a large building with the words, "Morgan Agricultural Systems" above the door. He glanced over my shoulder. "That's what it was called in the beginning," he said, "before the lawyers and branding people changed it to Gerald Tech." "You started that company?" I asked. He nodded, pulled over a stool, and sat beside me. "Started it in '79. I was tired of using second-hand parts to fix broken tractors. Thought I could build something better for small farms. Built it in that barn behind us. Sold our first patented module in '82. By '95, we were shipping to 6 states. What happened to it?" I asked. He was silent for a moment. Then he looked me in the eye. Your father happened. It took him a full hour to explain how Patrick, fresh out of college, had joined the company in the late 90s, how he'd convinced Grandpa to take on investors, how the board eventually voted to replace him as CEO in 2010. He was forced out of his own company, the one he had built with his own hands. I was stunned. Why didn't you fight back? I asked. He smiled bitterly. Because I was tired, and because your father was my son. After that, he walked out of the workshop and didn't come back until dinner. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind ran in circles. This man who barely spoke, who treated everything with precision and control, had been quietly carrying a betrayal like that for years. I began to understand why he lived the way he did, why every nail in this house was perfectly aligned, why he kept to himself because everything else had let him down. The next day, the housekeeper came. I hadn't met her before, but she moved through the place like it was second nature. Her name was Dean Collins, though she said everyone just called her Dee. She was in her late 50s, sharp eyes, short hair, and a warm but no-nonsense tone. So you're the grandson, she said, giving me a once-over. He talks about you. Not a lot, but enough. I didn't know what to say. She paused by the fireplace and added, You know he's sick, right? I looked up. Sick. She nodded slowly. Prostate cancer, diagnosed 2 years ago. He didn't want treatment, said he'd rather go on his feet than waste away in a hospital. I stared at her, the pieces falling into place. The coughing, the injections, the weight he seemed to lose week by week. He didn't tell me. He wouldn't, she said. That's his way, but you deserve to know. After she left, I found him sitting on the porch, staring out at the fog-covered woods. I sat beside him, unsure how to bring it up. I know, I said finally. He nodded like he had been expecting it. Not much to do about it now, he said. I'm not afraid. I just want to make sure things are in order before it's time. I looked at him, really looked. There was a calm in his voice, but it wasn't resignation. It was resolve. You're not alone, I said quietly. He didn't respond, but he rested his hand briefly on my shoulder. Just for a second. Then he stood up and walked back inside. That evening, we sat at the kitchen table going through old folders. He showed me patents, designs, and journals filled with sketches of machines I couldn't even name. Each page was a piece of the life he had built piece by piece and lost. And now he was placing them in my hands. I didn't know it then, but this was how he said, Goodbye. The MIT shift, I had always imagined the day I got into college as one filled with cheering, hugging, and celebration. Instead, I stood on the porch holding an envelope from MIT. The acceptance letter crisp and clean in my hands while Grandpa stirred soup in the kitchen like it was just another Tuesday. I got in, I said louder than I meant to. He looked over his shoulder. Into MIT. Good for you. That's it, I asked. You're not even going to say congratulations? He set the spoon down and wiped his hands on a towel. Lucas, I'm proud, but I never thought school was the answer for you. I stared at him. It's MIT, the best engineering program in the country. You think that's not worth it? He sat across from me at the kitchen table. You want to spend 4 years in classrooms listening to people who've never held a wrench. Real learning happens when your hands are dirty and your brain has to improvise, not from textbooks written by people who don't build. You didn't even ask me what I wanted. I snapped. He looked at me calm as ever. What do you want, Lucas? I hesitated. I wanted this. I wanted to prove something. To him, to myself, maybe even to my parents. I didn't say that out loud. I want to go, I said. Then go, he said. But don't expect me to pretend I believe in it. I packed that night. It wasn't dramatic. He helped me carry my bags to the truck. We didn't say much. At the edge of the driveway, he handed me an envelope. "For your first month," he said. It was cash, more than I expected. I didn't say thank you. He didn't ask me to. In Boston, I moved in with two guys I met online who were also starting at MIT. The apartment was cramped, loud, and cold, but I loved it. The campus buzzed with energy. Professors spoke in equations. Labs smelled like solder and possibility. Still, something felt off. I would wake up thinking I heard the creak of the farmhouse stairs or the soft rumble of Grandpa's old truck. 2 months in, I got a package, no return address, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a device, small and rectangular, with a panel of copper wires and a handwritten note. "You'll understand why." That was all it said. I took the device apart in my dorm room. It was elegant, intricate, and far beyond what we were studying in class. I ran simulations, tested circuits, even showed it to one of my professors who called it fascinating and ahead of its time. Late one night, I sat at my desk staring at the thing. My roommates were asleep. The city buzzed below our window, and I thought of the barn, the tools, the silence, and the quiet way he had always prepared me for something bigger than school. Maybe he hadn't sent me away. Maybe he had sent me forward. The return before the end. The call came on a Sunday morning in April. I was sitting in the campus cafe, coffee going cold beside my laptop, when Dean's name lit up the screen. I hadn't heard from her since Christmas. "He's in the hospital," she said. "You should come." I didn't ask questions. I booked the next bus out of Boston and spent the 3-hour ride staring out the window, replaying everything I hadn't said the past 3 years. When I finally arrived at the Concord Hospital, the sky was dark with rain, the kind that soaks your clothes in seconds. Dean met me in the lobby, her face lined deeper than I remembered. "He asked for you," she said simply. He was in a small private room hooked up to machines that beeped softly. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes were sharp the moment they found mine. "Took you long enough," he said. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. I walked in and took the chair beside him. We didn't speak for a long moment. His hand was resting on a manila folder on the tray table. "I knew you'd come," he finally said. "I just didn't know if it would be in time." "Don't say that," I replied, swallowing the lump in my throat. He gave a tired half smile. "I need you to finish something for me," he said, pushing the folder toward me. Inside were sketches, diagrams, and schematics. I recognized some of the components from the prototype he'd sent me years ago. But this was different, bigger, more refined. "A new irrigation controller," he explained. "Solar-powered, smart adaptive output, for small farms, the kind no one builds for anymore." I flipped through the pages, each more detailed than the last. "Why me?" I asked. "Because it's not just design, it's philosophy. These machines aren't just tools, they're trust between builder and user. I built everything to last. You get that?" I didn't respond. I just nodded. That night I stayed at the farmhouse. It felt smaller somehow and emptier. Dean had been keeping the place up, but it wasn't the same without him in it. I spread the plans across the old kitchen table. Dean brewed coffee and sat across from me. "You know, he waited until he knew he was fading to give this to you," she said. "Why?" I asked. "Because he didn't want to burden you with it until you were ready," she replied. I didn't sleep. I soldered, reworked circuits, calibrated code, adjusted modules. I lost track of time. Dean helped when she could, holding lights, finding tools, making notes. For a while it felt like the barn again, the quiet hum of work, the shared focus. By dawn we had a working prototype. I held it up in the morning light, my hands shaking from exhaustion, but my chest full of something I couldn't name. He gave me a legacy, and now I had something to give back. The funeral and the shock, the news came quietly. Dean called again. This time there were no words of preparation, just 3 sentences. He passed early this morning, peacefully. I'm sorry, the funeral was held at the old community chapel in Concord. Rain fell like a curtain, soft and persistent. I wore the only black suit I owned. Dean stood beside me, a steady presence as we greeted the handful of neighbors, former employees, and old friends who came to pay their respects. The casket was closed, per his request. No flowers. Just a photograph of him from the early Gerald Tech days placed on a small easel, smiling beside a prototype machine in a field full of sun. I gave the eulogy. My hands trembled at first, but once I started speaking about the man I had come to know, the man who raised me in silence and steel, the words flowed. He was not a man of many words, I said, but everything he built to last. That includes me. The service ended with quiet murmurs and people began to leave. I stood by the casket, running my hand along the edge one last time. Dean whispered that she would give me a moment alone. I nodded, feeling the weight of goodbye settle like stones in my chest. Then I saw them, 2 figures at the back of the chapel, dressed sharply, standing like they owned the air around them. My parents, Eleanor and Patrick Morgan. I hadn't seen them in over a decade. Not since that snowy night when they left me at the doorstep like a package they didn't want. They moved through the pews with confidence that felt entirely out of place at a funeral. Behind them was a woman in a tailored gray pantsuit, her hair in a sleek bun. Her expression professional and unreadable. She carried a leather briefcase. Lucas, Eleanor said, her voice far too casual for the moment. "What are you doing here?" I asked, heart thudding. Patrick stepped forward, hands in his coat pockets. "This is still our family. We came to pay our respects. And this is Sandra Brooks, our attorney," Eleanor added, as if that explained anything. Dean, sensing the shift in energy, returned to my side. "Sandra didn't waste time. We're here to contest the will. There's reason to believe Mr. Morgan may not have been in a sound state of mind when the final documents were executed." My jaw clenched. He had it notarized. His attorney recorded the signing. He knew exactly what he wanted. Nevertheless, Sandra said, pulling papers from her briefcase, "We've filed for a temporary injunction to halt all asset transfers until the matter is properly reviewed by probate court." Patrick gave a rehearsed sigh, then turned to Dean. "You were always around. Surely you noticed something." He was getting confused near the end, wasn't he? Dean's eyes narrowed. Absolutely not. He was sharper than most people half his age, and he made his choices clear. I took the papers and scanned them. Legal jargon, threats wrapped in formatting. All of it meant to delay, to stir doubt, to lay claim to something they had abandoned years ago. "You never called, never visited." "Not once," I said, voice rising. "He waited for you until the end, and now you show up for this. You think you earned this?" Eleanor said, her mask slipping. "Playing farm boy for a few years, and suddenly you're the heir to 100 million. I didn't say anything." "I didn't have to." Dean stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "He chose Lucas. He left him everything because he believed in him. You both threw that away long ago." Sandra adjusted her glasses. "We'll let the courts decide." They turned and walked out. The sound of their heels echoed like thunder on the chapel floor. I watched them go, the briefcase swinging like a weapon. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to clear, but inside I felt the storm just beginning. What should have been closure had become the opening shot in a battle I never wanted but knew I had to finish. This wasn't over, not even close. The legal war begins. The morning after the funeral, I sat at the old kitchen table staring at my grandfather's estate documents, trying to understand what came next. The rain from the day before had turned the fields muddy and gray. Dean made coffee and laid a hand on my shoulder. "You need a good lawyer," she said. "Someone who knew him. Someone who understands what this family is capable of." There was only one person who came to mind: Harold James. He had been my grandfather's estate lawyer for nearly 2 decades, and Grandpa trusted him like a brother. I hadn't spoken to Harold in years, but I still had his number saved. He picked up on the second ring. "Lucas, I've been expecting your call," he said. We met that afternoon at his office in downtown Concord, an old colonial building tucked behind the courthouse. Harold was in his 60s now, lean and sharp-eyed, still wearing the same kind of tweed jackets he always had. He motioned for me to sit, then pulled out a thick file from his cabinet. "I know why you're here," he said. "Sandra Brooks filed the injunction yesterday." I nodded. "They're going after everything." Claiming he wasn't in his right mind, Harold tapped the folder. "That's not going to work. Your grandfather anticipated this. He made sure his last will was rock solid, signed, witnessed, notarized, and recorded, and more than that, he left you something else." He slid an envelope across the desk. My name was written in bold, deliberate strokes. I opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter and a flash drive. The letter was brief: "Lucas, if you're reading this, it means I've moved on. I knew they would come for what they never earned, so I left them nothing. You, however, are my legacy. Finish what we started, and if needed, use the truth." "Use the truth." Harold plugged the flash drive into his laptop and turned the screen toward me. The video was grainy, recorded in a workshop. The image was clear. My grandfather sat at his workbench, looking directly into the camera. "This is my last statement," he began, voice steady. "My name is Raymond Morgan. I am of sound mind and body, and I wish to make it clear that I leave my estate, including all Gerald Tech Holdings patents, properties, and intellectual property, solely to my grandson, Lucas Morgan. He is the only member of this family who has earned my trust, my respect, and my love." He paused, then leaned forward. "My son Patrick and his wife Eleanor abandoned Lucas when he was 15. They never returned. They have no right to what I built. I want the world to know this. Let there be no doubt. My decisions were made clearly, without influence." The video ended. Harold sat back. "That's your bulletproof vest," he said. A week later, at a press conference outside the Concord courthouse, I stood beside Harold as he distributed copies of the video to reporters. Dean stood in the crowd, arms crossed. Cameras flashed. Microphones extended toward me. "Mr. Morgan, why release the video now?" "Because the truth deserves daylight," I said. My grandfather left nothing unclear. Any attempts to challenge that are about greed, not justice. The clip aired on the local news that night and quickly spread. Headlines splashed across screens: "Grandson defends inheritance with emotional video. Raymond Morgan's final words shake legal battle." The next morning, my parents' lawyer filed a motion to block the video as inadmissible, claiming undue influence. But the damage had been done. Public sentiment turned. People saw through the facade. I knew this was just the beginning. There would be hearings, filings, long months of legal chess. But for the first time, I felt like I was not just defending what was mine. I was defending the man who made me who I am. And I wasn't going to lose. Exposing the scheme. The buzz from the video hadn't settled when Maggie Sinclair called me. She was a local reporter who'd covered business and politics for over a decade, and had known my grandfather from his early Gerald Tech years. Her voice was firm, inquisitive, not the usual newshound tone I had started to resent. "Lucas, I believe there's more to this story than just a will," she said. I want to help you find it. We met at a diner off Main Street. She wore a dark blazer, hair pulled back, notepad ready. You think the public's gonna care about old business drama? I asked over lukewarm coffee. They care when people lie, especially about family, especially about money. Within days, Maggie had begun digging into public records, court filings, and financial disclosures. She emailed me a PDF late one night. I opened it and stared. Patrick Morgan filed for personal bankruptcy in 2015. Multiple foreclosures, failed ventures. Eleanor had been investigated in 20 for falsifying documents while working at a private care agency. She had resigned quietly before charges were filed. Why didn't I know any of this? I asked Harold the next morning. Because your grandfather didn't want you distracted. He figured if they ever came back, they'd expose themselves. At the next court hearing, Sandra Brooks doubled down. She motioned to suppress the video, citing that it was filmed without proper legal oversight and could be manipulated. She painted it as a private family message, not a legal document. It's not admissible under probate evidentiary rules, Your Honor, she argued. Harold stood. The man had a way of commanding silence without raising his voice. Your Honor, the original will notarized and recorded is clear. This video only supports the testator's state of mind and intent. If needed, we can authenticate the footage. I watched the judge's expression. He leaned back, fingers steepled. We'll consider a motion for authentication at a later date. Until then, the video remains unofficial evidence. After the hearing in the courthouse parking lot, I slumped into Harold's passenger seat. They're gonna try everything, I muttered. That's why we keep going, he replied. Back at the farmhouse, Dean was waiting. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a small hard drive. What's this? I asked. I kept backups, she said. Your grandfather didn't trust digital storage alone. That video, it was recorded directly to the farm's workshop surveillance system. Time-stamped. No edits. My eyes widened. We can prove it's real, I said. Better than that, Dean replied. We can prove he meant it for everyone to see. We spent the next 2 days preparing. Maggie connected us with a forensic video analyst. The footage was pulled directly from the workshop's surveillance DVR, showing the unbroken timestamp, the unedited clip, the same message I'd already released. This version was stronger, legally undeniable. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about truth, and we were armed with it. Media and reputation. Maggie published her first article under the headline, "The Legacy Fight Inside the Morgan Family Estate War." The story opened with the inheritance battle, but quickly shifted into exposing Patrick and Eleanor's financial collapse and questionable ethics. It went viral within hours. News outlets picked it up. Talk shows debated it. Forums lit up with speculation, accusations, and armchair legal takes. The story had everything the media loved. Family betrayal, money, old power, and a young man suddenly thrust into the spotlight. At first, I tried to ignore it. I stayed at the farmhouse, tinkering in the workshop, burying myself in the unfinished schematics Grandpa left behind. But I couldn't avoid the calls forever. Harold's phone buzzed every hour. Reporters staked out the driveway. Dean came into the kitchen one morning with the newspaper. "You need to see this," she said. The front page showed my face next to Grandpa's, split down the middle. The headline read, "Grandson or Gold Digger, Public Opinion Divided." I felt sick. That same day, we received notice from the judge. A temporary injunction had been granted. All estate transfers were frozen pending resolution of the legal dispute. No assets could be touched, no properties sold, no patents moved. Harold tried to reassure me. This is normal. It's just to prevent anyone from doing anything rash while the court evaluates everything. But it didn't feel normal. It felt like we were stalled while Patrick and Eleanor schemed in the background. That night, Maggie sent me a voice message. "Lucas, I just got a call from a source at AgriFuture Fund. They've pulled their pending investment from the Morgan Foundation. Said they didn't want to be associated with a potential fraud case. Even though you haven't done anything wrong, they're scared of bad press." My stomach twisted. That foundation was supposed to fund rural innovation projects my grandfather dreamed of. Now it was frozen like everything else. The next morning, another article dropped. This one from a business journal. Former care worker under investigation again as inheritance battle heats up. It quoted sources from Eleanor's past job. Accusations resurfaced. The timing made it obvious her motives were being questioned, and people were listening. The media storm raged, and somehow I found clarity within it. They were trying to shake me, make me fold. But every attack revealed more of who they really were, and I wasn't going anywhere. Inheriting the mission, I woke up before dawn the next morning. The farmhouse was quiet, just like it had been when I first arrived over a decade ago. I walked into Grandpa's study and pulled the worn letter from the top drawer. His handwriting had started to fade with time, but every word still felt etched into my memory. "Finish what we started." I knew exactly what that meant now. It wasn't about defending his money. It was about defending his dream. I spent the next week diving into the designs he left behind. Diagrams and sketches of a new precision irrigation system that used AI and sensor-based soil feedback. He called it Project Eden. For months he'd been refining it but hadn't gotten it past the prototype phase. Now it was my turn. Dean helped clear out the old barn and we turned it into a full-blown lab. I reached out to former classmates from MIT engineers I'd met in Boston, even a couple of Grandpa's old colleagues. Most didn't respond, but then one name stood out in my inbox. Ethan Carlisle. Former lead engineer at Gerald Tech before my father took over and downsized half the R&D staff. "Lucas, your grandfather was the best man I ever worked for. If you're serious about carrying the torch, I'd be honored to join you." By the end of the month, I filed paperwork to incorporate Lucas Farm Tech. The name felt right, not just a company, but a commitment. We documented the prototype build step by step, posted updates online, and to my surprise, the story caught fire again. But this time it wasn't scandal. It was support. Young farmers from Nebraska to Georgia sent in messages. Videos of failing crops, broken tools, and hope in their eyes. The kind of people Grandpa built his tech for. We mailed out early demo kits to 3 struggling farms in Kansas as a pilot program. Then something unexpected happened. A small local radio station aired a segment about us. A week later, a national agriculture magazine ran a feature titled, "From Inheritance Battle to Innovation, Lucas Morgan's Mission to Honor a Legacy." That afternoon, as I walked back to the barn, a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out, late 50s, with weathered hands and a leather satchel. "Name's Martin Blake," he said. "I was part of Gerald Tech's soil tech team until Patrick gutted the place. Your grandfather gave me my first real shot. If there's a place for me here, I'd like to earn it again." I shook his hand without hesitation. "You're already in." It felt like the farm was coming alive again, not just with machines and blueprints, but with purpose. The court battle wasn't over. My parents hadn't backed down. But for the first time since this war began, I wasn't fighting alone. I was building something they couldn't touch, the verdict. The verdict hearing wasn't scheduled until noon, but I had been up since dawn. I spent the morning walking the frozen fields outside the farmhouse. Steam rising from my coffee, every breath a quiet affirmation that this life, this work was mine now. Not theirs, not stolen, not gifted, earned. By the time I arrived at the courthouse, the media was already swarming the steps. Dozens of lenses turned as I stepped out of the car. I didn't flinch. I was no longer the abandoned boy hidden behind an old man's shadow. I was his legacy now, and I had a right to be here. Harold met me at the front. Calm as always, his tie perfectly knotted, eyes sharp. Inside, the courtroom was hushed but buzzing. Patrick and Eleanor sat stiffly across the aisle, dressed in coordinated gray. Their attorney, Sandra Brooks, conferred with them in tight whispers. Patrick looked older, tired, but not defeated. Eleanor wore a forced calm, the kind that cracked the moment things didn't go her way. Judge Caldwell entered, flanked by her clerks. The room rose, then sat. She went straight to the bench. After reviewing all submitted evidence, witness statements, and the validity of the supplementary materials provided by Mr. Morgan's legal counsel, this court finds the will of Raymond Morgan to be legally binding and properly executed. There was a moment where the air just held still. The estate, valued at approximately $100 million, will be granted in full to Lucas Morgan, the named and rightful heir. The objections filed by Mr. and Mrs. Patrick Morgan are hereby dismissed. Eleanor gasped. Your Honor, this is absurd. Where his blood, Judge Caldwell didn't flinch. This is a courtroom, not a therapist's office, Mrs. Morgan. You may appeal through proper channels, but this court has made its decision. Patrick stood, his jaw tight. He didn't look at me. He took Eleanor by the arm, and the two of them left in silence. Not a glance back, not a word. Outside, the reporters surged. Questions flew. Microphones extended like bayonets. Harold shielded me and gave a brief statement. Mr. Morgan is grateful the court has respected his grandfather's wishes. He looks forward to continuing his work and honoring the legacy built before him. We returned to the farmhouse late that evening. The snow had started again, covering the driveway in a thin layer of white. Dean was in the kitchen, stirring something warm. She looked up, nodded, and set out 2 mugs. You did right by him, she said softly. That's what matters. I nodded, but the words didn't settle. I went upstairs and opened the drawer where I had hidden a small envelope weeks ago. I wrote it the night after the video went public, when I realized that no court ruling, no public support would mean more than this one gesture. I walked outside, the cold biting at my cheeks, and dropped it in the mailbox. There was no return address. Just 2 names on the front, Patrick and Eleanor Morgan. Inside the envelope, 1 sentence. Thank you for abandoning me. The following morning, I sat with the team at the barn. Ethan pulled up the Eden deployment map, dozens of farms now running pilot models, early data showing higher yields, lower waste. Martin grinned as he handed me the latest firmware update. They believed in the mission. But I still paused for a long moment at Grandpa's empty chair in the workshop. I wasn't doing this for vengeance. I wasn't doing it for money. I was doing it for every hour he spent teaching me every word he never said, but showed in action. I was doing it because love, when quiet, still echoes. And now that echo lived in every field our machines touched. The fight was over, but the legacy had only just begun, closure and continuance. The early spring chill was still in the air when I parked my truck beside the barn. Morning mist clung to the fields, thin like breath curling off the edges of the earth. The place was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was waiting. I walked the long path behind the barn with the blueprint tube in one hand and a bundle of wildflowers Dean had left on the kitchen table in the other. Every step echoed the years I had spent on this land, every crunch of gravel a memory resurfacing. At the far corner of the property, under a maple tree just starting to bud, lay Grandpa's grave. The headstone was modest. Raymond Morgan, 1940, 2023. Beneath it etched in simple lettering, "Build for what matters." I knelt, placing the flowers and blueprint down gently. The blueprint paper had been rolled and unrolled so many times it barely held its shape. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it was done. His vision had become mine, and now it was real. "You gave me everything," I said quietly, even when I didn't know it. I sat cross-legged in the grass, letting the quiet speak. I thought about the nights we worked side by side, the way he would grunt approval instead of praise. I remembered the day he taught me how to solder and the time he let me take apart his favorite irrigation sensor, just so I could understand how it worked. He wasn't a man of many words, but his silence always had weight, meaning. Now I carried that forward. I stayed until the breeze picked up, rustling through the trees, then made my way back toward the house. As I crossed the yard, I saw Ethan and Reggie in the distance, testing the Eden rig along the perimeter fence. Martin was setting up a live stream for our upcoming product reveal. Everything was moving, breathing, alive. Inside the farmhouse, Dean had made coffee. She handed me a cup and gave my arm a quick squeeze. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm good. Better than I've ever been." Later that day, we uploaded the first demo video of the Eden system in action. Within hours, the clip had spread across agri-tech forums and small farming communities. Comments flooded in messages from young farmers in Kansas, veterans in Georgia, single mothers running orchards in California. One message stood out. A girl named Harper from Nebraska wrote, "Your story gave my dad hope again. He says your grandpa reminds him of his own. Thank you for carrying that forward." I read it out loud in the barn that night. No one said anything, but the silence again said enough. By summer, we had contracts lined up across 6 states. We weren't just another tech company. We were a movement, a legacy born out of solitude, grown in struggle, and rooted in something unshakable. A few reporters came by to do a follow-up. They asked about the lawsuit, the inheritance, the scandal. I answered politely but kept it brief. That wasn't the story I wanted to tell anymore. What happened in court was justice. What happened here on this land, in this shop with these people, was the story. Before harvest season, I made one final visit to the gravesite. This time I brought a small metal plaque engraved with the words Grandpa had once spoken, "Let the land remember you." I placed it beneath the maple tree and stood in silence, letting the breeze pass through. So if you've ever been cast aside, made to feel like an afterthought, I want you to know something. You are not the sum of what they left behind. You are the legacy of everything you choose to build in their absence. Thank you for being here. If this story meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this don't end. They just find new voices to carry them forward.